All right, so Jenny, it's 8:01. So can you please kick us off with our land recognition, and then we would jump into this conversation.
Of course. Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Welcome. It almost feels like welcome back, actually. And it is sunny. I'm not sure it was sunny last time we were here. Wherever you're joining us from, I think the majority is in Calgary. We're going to talk about learning, and that's really poignant as we consider just this small, important part to advancing the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada's calls to action. So thank you for joining us for just a moment to recognize the land where you're learning today. We all have a heritage, and it's important for us to acknowledge that. SAIT's main campus is based in Calgary, and SAIT acknowledges that it's situated on the traditional territories of the Blackfoot Confederacy. Today that encompasses our Indigenous people of the Treaty 7 region, the Siksika, the Piikani, the Kainai, the Tsuut'ina, the Stoney Nakoda, and the Northwest Métis homeland. SAIT acknowledges all of the people who make their homes in the Treaty 7 region of Southern Alberta. Wherever you are, thank you for just joining us for a moment to recognize the land that we're connected to.
Thanks, Jenny. That's right. Giving me a chance for my brain to speed up, Brent. That's there we go. I appreciate that. So as Jenny mentioned, we are here to talk about learning and how do you create a great learning organization, or this may be a polarizing comment for some, a learning culture. And we can dig into that. And I just noticed one thing in the chat. Yes, good greetings from Germany. That's fantastic. Wow. So thank you for joining us. I am not going to spend a lot of time on introductions. I'm going to pop into the chat the LinkedIn profiles of Geordie MacPherson with Tundra and Kathy Osterland from Wajax. And these are two tremendous people that I've come to know over the past couple of years, organizations that have a terrific viewpoint on learning. And I am just excited to have the chance to learn from them today as we get into this conversation. So Geordie and Kathy, thank you so much for joining us. Jenny's going to be monitoring the chat and the Q&A to try and, as Brent pointed out, give me time to focus on the conversation. And so with that, I think it might be important, Geordie and Kathy, to maybe give a little perspective to everybody just on the Tundra Wajax organization. For those on the line that may not necessarily know who Tundra and Wajax are, and the coming together of the organizations, I believe, what is this now, almost a year and a half? It feels something like that. But why don't I turn it over to you just to keep that start there, and then we'll jump into the conversation.
Sure.
You're going to do that?
Well, I'll start and talk about Wajax, and then you can talk a little bit more about Tundra. So Wajax is a Canadian-owned company. It's been around for over 160 years, which is pretty amazing. It's got a very strong, rich history in Canada. And what we primarily do right now is we do a lot of distribution of products, industrial products. We have an equipment side of the business where if you see like a Hitachi excavator, that came from Wajax. Wajax sold that to customers, right? And then another part of the business that's really growing right now is our engineered repair services business. And so we have locations all across Canada. And the acquisition of Tundra was actually to complement that area of the business. And so Geordie, maybe if you want to talk a little bit about Tundra.
So technically that makes us Canadian owned as well, as we always have been. So there you go. Yeah, no, it's we were kind of a small, nimble, agile organization, headquarters in Calgary. And then we had the opportunity to meet Wajax, and what we offer kind of complements Wajax. And I'd like to think a little bit no more into the West. And it's been an exciting ride as far as for you're seeing a merger between a larger organization, much larger organization, and a smaller organization, and kind of our approach to culture, people, and what we have to offer as organizations too. So it's been a pretty neat experience.
Perfect. And we can get into, and I know when we were chatting in preparation for this, just some of the impacts or the differences that small and nimble versus larger and less nimble, if I can say that, perhaps plays in this space. But again, I've been so impressed with what I've seen from your two organizations around how you approach learning and how you approach development, which is really why I wanted to dig into this conversation. It's not a training conversation today, right? Corporate learning encompasses much more than just formal training. And maybe we could start, and Geordie, I'm going to pick on you and get you to go first here. But what is, I think let's maybe level set and talk about, define a learning organization or a learning culture. What is it? Like, let's give folks an idea of, when we say we want to be a learning organization, what is that?
Okay, just for the audience sake, he went off script. He was supposed to start with "Hey Kathy" on every one of his questions, and that didn't work out. So yeah, no, it's a neat question. I hear a lot of people bring up learning culture, and more I think about it, and even to the point where I took culture out of my title. Why? Because it gets so overused. And it's not that I'm opposed to it. It's not that I don't believe into it, but I believe that there's more to it. There's no such thing as a learning culture. Learning is part of a culture, just as much as other parts there are other things that are part of culture that makes an organization. Our belief, as far as when you look at the Tundra approach, when it comes to everything that we do, is if you actually take a moment and look at our website, learning is one of our core values. And it's something that's kind of ingrained in us. And when I think about culture and you look at your organization and what actually makes a culture real, is it has to involve everybody from top up at every level. It's not just one thing that somebody takes on and dishes out and forces you to learn it. Truth is, if you've been in an organization where they just have one person just putting a whole bunch of things together and say, here you go, you don't know why it makes sense. You're not going to take the time to learn it or absorb it or enjoy it. It's no longer fun. So when you go to a learning culture or learning being part of our culture, a good part of it is it's from the management level, it's teaching our employees on how to function. It's if we find that there's gaps in skill sets, and sure, we reach out to the states and see how do we fill in those gaps, or how do we improve their skill sets. To even the fundamentals of creating a belonging culture. It's yeah, I don't know how else to better say it, but I do believe that when you think about a learning culture or learning being part of culture, it's kind of ingrained inside the organization. Everybody has to play a part of it. Everybody has to have a growth mindset, wanting to be out there and be better. I always normally start at the top when I start an interview is just understand this: Tundra is not perfect. And there's a lot, if you unpack that, it means that we have room to grow as an organization. We can be better, and that's not a terrible thing. And we always challenge our new employees as they come on board is, how can you help us make better? And it's a lot of misconceptions that we get is people walk in and saying, can you pay for my MBA? Can you pay for my bachelor's? Yeah, that's a bit of learning. I get it. And it's an important, but a person that's invested inside learning, it will take that initiative because they want to. They won't ask for it necessarily. And there's other skill sets that you'll get. I'm not saying that MBAs are not important, that bachelors are not important stuff, but there's so much learning out there. It's so diverse, even to the point where Kathy and I have often these conversations, and it's what is learning? And it is such a big topic out there. And I am so envious when you got learning professionals that are out there that it's not an easy job. Just because it is so diverse on actually how do you get it out to the team and how do you actually enroll it and get into the organization. So when I look up to Kathy, it's just I'm in awe on what she does. Kathy, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, that's fantastic. And before you jump there, Kathy, folks, I'm curious, as you're listening here, maybe pop in the chat what you think a learning organization is and what you think it should embody. So Kathy, just pick up from Geordie there now, please.
Yeah, sure. And I agree with Geordie. I think that the whole learning culture, it is actually a part of your corporate culture. That's what it is, right? And it is definitely a mindset of your employees, whether it is your individual contributors, your frontline employees, all the way up to your executives. We all need to be on the same page in terms of the importance of learning. And like Geordie was saying as well, it's not just about, going to, formal learning or institutions and things like that. We've got our on-the-job training. It's, having a buddy if you're a new person to the organization to kind of show you around so you can learn more about your location or even the company in general, right? So it's a lot more than just that formal piece. And it's really, employees individually need to own their own learning. But then as managers and, executives, we need to make sure that we, foster an environment where it's okay to take time off work and do these learnings. And we need to make sure that we provide the opportunities to them to be able to do that as well. I think that part of learning is if you have a learning organization, that's going to drive your growth. That's going to drive your improvements. That's going to drive innovation. So a lot of innovative companies, they definitely are a learning organization, and they foster that type of environment for their employees.
Yeah, it'd be difficult to picture learning or innovation not happening without learning, wouldn't it?
It has to.
Right, absolutely has to. Just sorry, Jenny, anything popping? I see lots going past me in the chat. It's actually kind of nice to not watch this all the time.
It's busy already, yes. Lots of recognition that in that learning culture, learning environment, learning organization, that there's risks to be taken. There's the sort of growth, that mindset piece, and how do we build that in? We already have one really good question in the Q&A, which speaks to the pandemic. So pre-pandemic, really active learning within the culture, everybody keen. And then during the pandemic, I can't tell you who or where it's come from, but they tried to promote the virtual, meeting people where they're at, and motivation for learning seems to be down given the sort of virtual and the less face-to-face version. So the question is, with staff less interested in growing as professionals and individuals, how do we get back to the rich learning environment?
Yes, please.
Geordie, go.
Oh, well, so, and I would challenge that. And I had time to think about it because just kind of trying to mentally prepare for this conversation, I knew that COVID, or this, I'm going to even just broaden it and say the last 2 years. Because if you think about the last 2 years, it was more than just COVID. You had DEI come to the forefront. You had people that were losing their employment. There was a lot out there. And so I would say perhaps traditional learning maybe has slowed down a bit. And it's, but if you step back and you look at it, employees themselves had to learn a lot, and a lot more to do with life. And it's, and probably there was a little bit more than just the workplace. They were learning on how to do things remote. And I think organizations themselves were learning on how do we actually go about this. There was a lot of learning. I would say that we, and guilty as Tundra, actually stepped back a little bit on the learning, but also that was just being a little bit more sensitive to our employees, knowing what they're going through with a lot of change. Mm-hmm. And it's, and our role essentially at that point in time, and it was a whole different kind of learning. And a huge congratulations to Wajax as far as for getting Gold for Excellence Canada. Just recently, part of that award was to do with wellness and training our employee on wellness, getting them engaged, getting to learn each other and on how to actually adapt to it, getting them to understand what our benefit plans are on there. Mental wellness was a big thing in the last year that has come up, but training our employees in those areas. So I would almost say I would suggest that we probably step back more into traditional learning, but had to pivot into a different kind of learning. And that was, I would say, it's more for the well-being of the employees. And that's the neat thing about when we talk learning as part of the organization, is having that agility, having that opportunity to kind of move around and understand what are the needs of the organization, but also what are the needs of our employees. And that always comes to the forefront. If you can actually pair those two up, you've created magic, because you created an organization that one, in this case here, truly believe that we care and what they do, and we value what they do, but also understand what their needs at the moment is. And not necessarily try to worry so much about how we're going to improve the organization in those moments. But I would say, in addition, when you got an organization like Wajax and Kathy on board, it's they have a lot of resources that we've never ever had access to. And so then the learning that we're able to provide, perhaps we're a little bit more on the micro learning side of things.
Yeah.
Kathy, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I think that the timing was pretty good when Tundra came on, just in terms of being able to leverage our learning management system, because a lot of people were working from home. So I think a lot of learning was happening as well. I agree with you, Geordie. I think that it was a bit different. It became more of kind of the online. A lot of people learned more about technology, because everybody had to use Teams. Everybody was using the learning management system more than maybe they had previously, because they were doing a lot of in-person training. Where the struggle would be more of our frontline workers that were still working in the offices or in the plants, sorry, and kind of that in-person technical training that we used to be able to do, and it has to be in person just because you're working on motors, those types of things. Those things were delayed, right? So there we struggled a bit, and it shifted to more of our certification trainers being able to go out to more peers now teaching each other, where there's always kind of that mentorship and more senior people are training, but it became a little bit more than it was previously. So I mean, we ended up putting together an external academy for Tundra, and pushed over a whole bunch of courses for them so that they were able to take that. And we saw a huge uptick in even the core Wajax team taking more of those courses. And a lot of them there's a lot of technical courses on there, but a lot of more of that human skills courses as well. So we did see that uptick, which was good.
There's a question that we talked about getting to, and it's kind of been already asked in the chat too. So this is more around how do you start, right? So what are the primers that foster a learning culture or help create a learning organization, Geordie, if we want to separate the organization and culture a bit? So where do you start? How do you make this a priority? How do you get the buy-in? I guess I think there's lots that's built up in the how do you start? And then the second part of this is, what is this going to look like day to day? So I think that's also an interesting piece. But Kathy, I'm going to go to you since we're supposed to start the questions. Hey, Kathy, what fosters a learning culture? Where do you start?
Yeah, I think, I think one of a conversation that I had previously with the group was around, the employee drives it. And I agree with that. I agree that employees need to own their learning. And so they can talk to their managers in that. However, if you're in an organization and you don't have that top level executive, senior leaders on board to be able to foster that environment where employees feel comfortable taking the time to do learning, during work hours, then it's going to really fall flat. So I think that you need to start with with really kind of like a business case to the organization to say, hey, this is what we want to do. This is what we think the ROI is going to be. And this is really, this is going to be the investment in the resources. And we need to make sure that kind of that leader, senior leader, top level is on board. And then we can really start to push out, learning initiatives, whether it's, and it doesn't always have to be just kind of learning management, e-learning courses or, virtual instructor like courses. It doesn't have to be that so much. Let's look at like learning paths and structured on the job training and all of those types of things. And then even employees sourcing their own courses as well and coming to their management and saying, hey, work related, I think I need to improve here. Can I go do this? And we need to provide the opportunity for those employees to have that opportunity and to be able to, cover costs within reason for the organization.
Geordie, anything to add?
Just start. To me, it was just press that button, get started. It's maybe not that easy, and I think when you're asking that question, sometimes it's everybody's so focused on getting everything to 100%. And
Right.
let's not worry about that. Think small and just try to do things. And as far as for Tundra, we didn't have a huge budget. We do not have a huge team. So a lot of it was just relying on our employees, and then it's also relying on management and everybody coming together. And what are key things that we're actually just trying to get out there, and what are things that people are passionate about. Admittedly, I could say we've done a lot of things. I wouldn't necessarily say wrong, because they're key learnings within organizations. But there's one year we decided, hey, let's try learning every day. And we had, what our beliefs was, every employee within the organization has something to teach you. So that's, I don't mean this in my partner in crime. It's Kristen, who works with me, spent a lot of times actually just training a lot of the managers and employees, put them through a little bit of a course on actually how to do a presentation and what was required, as far as make sure you have a workbook, have a PowerPoint, get them engaged, and went through a whole training program just for individuals to teach other staff one thing, whether that was gardening, whether that was project management, but just some soft skills and then some actual things on what they do day to day, just to learn each other. After a year, it started to get a little bit exhausting on them, because people had their day jobs as well. But it was a fun exercise to do. But I'm going to say, don't be afraid to try. Don't be afraid to experiment and get out there and try things. Not everybody has a huge budget. Not everybody's the Googles of the world where they can just throw an abundance of money out there. And I wish we could. But there's a lot of things that you can do for free that's going to add some value and enable people to grow. And I think Kathy kind of nails it every single time when she says, as far as where the leadership involvement is allow your employees to take the time to do it. So whether that's for them to go outside and do it, to take an hour or a half hour just to spend on stuff like this, but just give them the time to do it.
Yeah, time is an interesting one that continually comes up in the conversations that we're having right now. Is just being such a limiting factor. And I often wonder too, if organizations, when they think about this, are trying to make it, or perhaps think about it in a bigger way than what you were just describing, Geordie. Like, just make it something simple, something small, go ahead and do it. There was a great comment in the chat here that Jenny flagged for me. And thank you, Kat, for this. You can go to 100% courses, or you can go to 100 courses. But if you don't have the environment that you can come back and use or practice the new tools, it's not a learning culture or a learning organization. I couldn't agree more. I'm just curious, does that spur any additional thoughts for you in terms of, because you both spoken a lot, and I know the work you were talking about, Geordie, that Kristen was doing in terms of, you know, the daily sessions, and Kathy, you've talked a lot about the LMS and the number of courses that are there. How do you take those pieces and then make it tangible on a daily, weekly basis? Like, how do you give folks that space? Maybe I just answered my question in that it's as simple as giving them that space, but sometimes I think there's more to it than that. It's not as simple as just saying give them the space. So
yeah, and I just to make a comment there is yeah, I think you can give them the training in that for your, let's say, your individual contributors or your frontline managers. But however, if your managers on top of them don't understand the training, and then maybe they don't have the right leadership training to foster those people underneath, it's going to fall flat, right? So we need to, that's a really big thing. Whenever we roll out training to, let's say, our managers or, you know, frontline leaders, we make sure that there is also training for the leaders on top of them, and it may be a condensed version of it in terms of, let's say, like true leadership training or programs, and we make sure that it's a condensed version so that they understand the principles of it. so that they, when their leaders come to them, then they understand what they're talking about. They understand the verbiage and all of that, and know where their managers are coming from. So, because there's a big disconnect if they don't understand the principles, and we're running all their frontline leaders through all of this training, and their managers don't understand it, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Geordie, anything to?
Well, I can add out of the wazoo, but I would just say that yeah, no, that's an important question to ask. Is there's training just to do training, and then there's training that's actually adding value to the organization and being able to actually measure it in some form or another. And I think Kathy touches on one point, is educating the manager on what the expectations is. Why are we putting those employees through that training? And then the next thing is kind of a big question in a year's time. If you're going to invest into a big course and stuff like that, what are you hoping to get out of it? What is that expectations? And so what are we looking for as far as for sign where it's going to add value? No joke, back in the days, and I hate to say how old I am, but I had one person that did 3 Excel basic classes, and now 1 year back to back. And it's almost to the point where, well, why would you have to do that third one? Which then, are you doing training just to train, and maybe you might get something out of it that you're looking at specific. But same thing that we've talked about when we say where people have skill sets. A neat way to actually test that training is when you get those employees out there that are doing it, that perhaps are doing those MBAs or whatever it is, get them to train it back, to pass it back to the employees and run them through a little course to make sure that they have an understanding of what it is.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. And we talked a little bit in our preparation for this, is what is the role of teaching in creating a learning organization, right? So learning seems to be something that I do to receive, but how do you, and you probably just touched on this, Geordie, but is there approaches that you've taken that have really helped folks teach others? Because again, learning is much more than just taking a course or going to a training session. Where does coaching or mentoring fit into this? You mentioned on the job, there's buddy systems. So how do you, the importance of building those teaching moments in for individuals? Thoughts on that?
For sure. It's love coaching, big fan of it. And it's again, that's why I kind of stay away from these culture things, because you'll hear a lot out there coaching culture as well. And to me, it's injecting coaching within your culture and getting managers not necessarily just giving answers, but also challenging their employees on how to get that. If they get that training, challenge them on, say, what would you put in place as far as for solution? And you might just get a pleasant surprise. The biggest danger, and it's Adam Grant probably says it best as far as for leaders, is walking being that scientist. If you read his book, as far as I can't, I have to remember it, but he's written so many, but essentially he challenges people to say, hey, walk in with a mindset that you don't know everything, and challenge as far as for people to come up and it's kind of break it down. Don't come in with that thank you, think again, that's it. It's too early in the morning for me, but yeah, that's thinking again is a good approach. If you get a chance, read it. But I think that's essentially what a manager's role is challenging the norm as far as is that the way to do things, and maybe there's a better way of doing it. And as you get employees that get their training or education or learnings, and even if it's not formal, is challenge them to come up with that answer. And when we talk about innovation, it's a lot of times is what you know. If you get a different lens on something, you might get something that you never expected, and who knows what may come out of it. But I think as far as for a leader, it's live it, but also allow your employees to come up with solutions as well.
And sometimes that is so difficult to do. And Jenny and I have talked about this in other conversations where leaders may feel they have the answer or do have the answer, but allowing your people to actually get to the answer on their own can be so much more impactful, right? And so, Jenny, I've been seeing lots move past here. I just looked and see there's 5 or 6 questions in the Q&A. Do you want to grab one that seems most pertinent to where we're at?
Yes, there's loads. I think two actually. So I'm going to just head to the chat before we head to the Q&A, and it's a comment from Haley about we've talked about the necessity for taking risks, which is a part of learning. In order to learn and grow, you have to fail along the way. And her question, I think it was a question that, excuse me, what advice do you have for helping build that culture of experimentation, trying new things and being okay with not always being right when traditionally that might not be the case? And we see that in a lot of organizations. You have to hit this level or get this number and be right and get the job done. And when we're growing, that's not always possible. So the questions around advice in helping build that it's okay to experiment, take the risk. It's a support question again, I think.
Yeah, that's a big question.
Yeah.
I think, like, similarly to the whole learning, learning organization is that whole kind of leader piece as well, and the senior leaders being able to allow for those mistakes as well. Because if you want to be innovative and you want to grow, you're going to have to do the whole, pilot things out, see if it works, and be okay to say no. I know that, there's a lot of organizations that prior to COVID, may have sourced certain learning programs, like whether it was like leadership programs or something like that. But after COVID happened, and now you're coming back to your programs, are they still right for your organization? So we need to be able to look at that and scrap things if we need to scrap things or continue. We need to be able to have that ability to do that, because COVID changed organizations and the employee base a lot. And what we thought fit for the organization prior to then may not be fitting now. So it's important for, I think as learning professionals and learning leaders, we need to be able to convey that message to our senior leaders and let them know that we need to be able to be agile. We need to be able to change based on our environment and our employee base for what they really need.
Yeah, but if I had to add to that, it's well, for one, if you're going to fail at something, fail fast. Recognize that it's not working, and it's and be able to, as Kathy eloquently put it, is to pivot and go in different directions. Maybe if you're not nailing it, sometimes the idea might be great, but your approach might be not ideal, and you might just have to pivot in that direction, or just recognize maybe this is not the right time for this. And I would say that the last 2 years have really challenged those approach on everything. Just even think about it as the return to work as an example. On some people say we're going to go back to work, we're not going to do work, and it's just I think from what employees look for us is for us to make a decision, and a quick one at that. In addition to that is it does come from leadership. Leadership has, because when you think about it, especially if it's a public company, not a public company, time is money, and learning is an investment inside your employees. But I would almost challenge him on it's not the first time that we failed at things, and it doesn't always happen with learning. It doesn't always happen with a lot of things, but it's even with every failure, there's a learning within that. And it just, even with my example, as far as the training every day, not a failure, it was actually a great experiment to have, but it's giving it a shot, and you get feedback, you listen to your employees on what they're saying, listen from what you're getting from leadership. And I think if you're going to go into create some kind of a project or experiment, have an understanding of what that end outcome is. What are you expecting from it? And if you're not seeing it, then that's the time I think that you have to say, okay, we're going to stop. And what were the learnings from that? And where do we go next?
Yeah.
I would encourage people, just don't give up.
Yeah. No, it's a great point. And you've touched on a couple things that I see in some other questions, and maybe this is just a quick little extension to this conversation around failure. Tara's question here is, how would you inspire your junior staff to feel comfortable to fail or bring things forward, yet having them feel safe enough for the learning opportunity? Right. And that's, I think, is a really, and somebody in the chat earlier on, I missed it, April there's, the importance of psychological safety in this whole conversation. But how do you, this fail fast concept, how do you help people feel comfortable with that? I think is what we're getting at here.
From my perspective, I solely think for the junior people, their direct manager needs to be able to create that safe environment for them. I've seen in organizations where you could have one manager with junior people and they run that way. And it's really just that leader for those individuals. And I've seen another group in the same company where that does not happen. So it really comes down to the leader, the manager there, and as overall as an organization, and being the L&D department, we need to be able to supply that type of learning or training to our management team to hopefully change their mindset so that they do allow that, because that's what we want in our organization. So we need to make sure that we enable them with the tools and support to say, hey, it's okay to let your team fail fast, right? And shift if need be for the better of the organization. And we're okay with that. So we need to make sure at the levels that we enable that type of environment.
Cool. Geordie, I'm going to switch to another question here. Kathy, I think that bang on. Love that. There's leadership that has come up a few times, so I'm going to try and combine a couple of questions that we've gotten here. So one is, how do you ensure that a learning culture is maintained or preserved when there's a change in leadership? So this is an interesting piece that perhaps aligns with the coming together of Wajax and Tundra. But the other really good question, I think that ties with this as well, from Dana. How do you influence the learning culture in a company where the CEO only believes in the philosophy of one book he has read? There are good points in said book, but it's not necessarily the gospel. So again, there's a whole lot in senior leadership in this one that I think you could both dig into. And since Kathy did such a great job answering first the last time, Geordie, I'm coming to you this time.
I'm feeling the pressure. Well, the only thing I would probably add to that last question is just make sure you celebrate your small wins. And as a segue, bring that back into this next question is leaders have to celebrate those wins. And that's a good way to have them encourage the next opportunities for them to continue wanting to learn is when something actually succeeds, make sure that you win it. Now, as far as for succession within and leaders, well, this is a big one for Tundra because we were to some degrees we're preparing from that. I don't want to say that I read some tea leaves, but Iggy, who was our CEO, phenomenal CEO, is now the CEO of Wajax. So he did everything he could for Tundra, and now we have our next great CEO, which is Ashley. A lot of that came about with even within learning it's training your next leaders and have them see the value as far as for that training as well and invest inside them. So we had a pretty neat succession plan where we put 36 leaders through a building leaders program. And so they were introduced to a lot of training, and so they've already seen the value of it. So our next leader essentially was the succession of Iggy, and a lot of it came through those training and a lot of coaching involved. But if they see the value in training, they will. I get it as far as I can't tell you how many times I heard about Jim Collins and Good to Great, and that book just sticks there, and that's the only book that they've read as far as let's get the right people on the bus. And so I hear you when people get stuck on a book. I normally talk to leaders and say books are great, but every organization is different. One book is not going to solve one organization's problems. Many books might, but take the best ideas and implement them. Not just one's going to solve it. And then, but let's challenge those theories as far as for what they're presenting in front. It's what are the learnings from the book that you're trying to implement? Let's see how we can make it happen. But then what are learnings from that you might actually learn from? And then you pivot, going back to the fail fast. But yeah, I've seen it too many times where that one book kind of guides them and they get very stuck on it. And you have to implement the whole book within that 1 year. It just never works out.
Yeah, January's chapter 1, February's chapter 2.
There's 13 chapters. What do we do?
Yeah. I hope it's a leap year. I don't know. Jenny, anything else jumping here in the Q&A? I'm just trying to get caught up.
We're kind of answering them as we go. There's a lot of that have been covered within there, and a lot of comment towards that celebrating the small wins.
Yeah.
And Adam had a great one in the chat here, how that actually leads to more buy-in towards learning that whole celebration piece. And I think in the weight of the pandemic, we often forget that small part too. So when we're taking training back again or learning back again, it gives us that opportunity to see the learning and to celebrate. As for actual questions, I'm trying to pick ones that we haven't sort of answered in process. Craig, I now know how difficult your job is.
No, that's okay. If you think we've covered them, I've got a couple others that I wanted to pose, because a couple other things came up in the conversation. 2 words, well, 4 words that stuck out. Accountability, right? So how do you create accountability in a learning organization, and what are you creating accountability to, right? Are you trying to create an environment where you're saying, your manager's asking you the question, what did you learn yesterday? So you can always have learned something, right? Like that, there is something there. So accountability. And then the other one that is always an interesting conversation to me in these conversations around learning, training, development, ROI. How do you define ROI? So for Kathy or Geordie, I'll put it out there. Accountability or ROI, which one do you want to take?
I'm taking accountability.
All
I
right.
don't know. What is ROI?
Return on investment.
Just kidding.
Yes. ROL, return on learning. How about that? So, Kathy, accountability to you first.
Yeah, so I think that this is something that I think is really important, especially in an organization where you are on your journey to become more of a learning organization. A lot of the time, most of the time, organizations they're really fixated on obviously getting the revenue, getting the margin, meeting their numbers. So I think that, as you're on your journey, how do you kind of shift that mindset a bit? Like, obviously, we still need to hit our numbers. We still need to have a viable organization. But how do you now, sprinkle in accountability for those leaders to ensure that their people are continuing to learn, continuing to get certified if they are, technicians on the ground level. And really this will feed into Geordie's and really letting them understand or helping them understand the ROI of that. If you have a technician uncertified, you're probably going to have a little bit more rework. Things are going to take a little bit longer. You may have some warranty return issues from getting money back from your vendors. So how do you make sure that they understand all of those pieces, and then they understand the importance of letting their technicians and letting their people go to the training to get certified so that they can see that return on the bottom line for their branches or for the organization.
Geordie?
She did a good job. But as far as for ROI, it's always a tough sell and it's an easy sell. I think it depends, and it's really comes down to how you're measuring it and what the expected outcome is. Then it goes back to the old, there's training just to do training, and then there's training that's going to add value to the organization and timeliness of it. Good example, succession planning, when we did the 36 individuals. From those 36 individuals, we had 12 people that actually grew into the organization and grew up into either it was a further management role or whatever. Those are individuals that we didn't have to hire. So then you look at your recruitment cost as far as what it saved you on there, your retention, because you're getting leaders that are actually bringing that tribal knowledge, I guess, from within Tundra, and it's growing it and bringing it to that next level. And they've already seen the value inside of it. So it really comes down to what are you expecting? What's that expected outcome from when you're putting it in front of them? And then, it's measuring it. it's very hard, and that's always been a challenge, and it's a challenge that we and Kristen have talked out when we first started this journey, as far as for getting her on board and getting more involved as far as for learning, is okay, we can put training out there, but how do we actually measure the success of it, the impact that it's actually going to have to the organization? And it's but from that was kind of growing and figuring out, okay, how are we going to measure this, and what does success look like? And sometimes it's not as tangible as dollars, but it could be, it's kind of looking in the back end to see where you're getting the values. Then also, when you're having that conversation with your leaders about the ROI, get them to actually tell you what their expected outcome and how you're going to measure it. And so challenge them with it. I think Kathy was mentioning on educating what the program is, but also say, hey, when we're doing this, what are you hoping to see from it? And if you're checking the boxes, and not just slightly, it's not that they came back and they seem like they liked it. It's in 3 months' time, 6 months' time, 9 months' time, what are they expecting to see from those individuals?
Right. Yeah, and I think for me, you just touched on a couple of key things. The ROI is so historically, it's tied to numbers, it's tied to dollars and cents, right? And this isn't necessarily always dollars and cents. Yes, in theory, if you're learning, you're becoming more productive, contributing more to the bottom line, 100%. The other key thing here, I think, Geordie, that you touched on is that time frame, right? What's the 1 year return, the 3 year return, the 5 year return? It's not, I just completed some learning, so I'm 100% better tomorrow. That time frame, I think, and it goes back to some of the earlier comments of, we've all got demands we've got to meet today. The timing, my day job is there. I've got to deliver results, yada, yada, yada. And often learning and development becomes something that extends past those timelines of the immediate needs of the business, right? And so there's, I think, where the friction comes in all of this, and where the real arguments or discussion around, do we actually have time to invest in this learning right now? So go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, and sometimes we get hung up on ROI, going back to that one book that leaders just want to follow. Maybe change it to ROE, which is return on expectations.
Yeah. I love that. It's suddenly 8:48. This 45 minutes to an hour has flown past. There's been some great comments here that I've just been able to catch up on. A couple other interesting questions I don't think we have time for, because I want to make sure everybody gets to their 9 a.m. meetings. And so I know for many of you, it still could be clicking from this meeting to the next one. Some of you may actually be in a position where you have to get up and walk to the meeting room. So that's exciting these days. But final thoughts, I thank you so much for this. I really do appreciate you making the time. But Kathy, if you wanted to leave folks with one final thought on creating a learning organization, what would it be? And Geordie, the same questions coming to you.
I think one thing I'll leave that I haven't touched on yet was, and I guess we touched a little bit on it. I think, Craig, you were talking about it in terms of capturing knowledge. So I would recommend in any organization that you create some type of mechanism to capture knowledge, especially from your folks that might be exiting. So whether they're going to be retiring or something like that, that's a wealth of knowledge that is going to go out the door unless we have something in place to help capture that. One of the things that my team and I have been working on is creating a workbook, essentially, for knowledge capture. And we have an employee who's retiring, has very specialized knowledge. And so he's rolling through this workbook to kind of lay out everything that he does, and the specialties and his contacts and all of that. And then we're going to be working on imparting that to the person that's going to succeed him. So it's at pilot stage, so we're trying it. And I think it's going to work fabulously. And I've got an excellent L&D specialist that's working on that piece. And I would recommend that is definitely something, because you don't want that knowledge walking out the door.
Yeah. Excellent.
I would say, and that's pretty cool, is do an inventory of what your staff has as far as for knowledge, and so that you know what's going and what's coming in. A common question I always get up is kind of, what's the right mix? How do you best do it? And how do you go about it? Is how much do you do external? How much you do internal? And always my answer to that is know your organization, know that every organization is different, that there's not a perfect mix. You're going to have to pivot from time to time, but and don't try to copy what everybody else is doing. Simply because if you try doing that or mimicking, take great ideas for sure, but don't try to do the exact same thing somebody else is doing, because you're going to fall in that pitfall to find out your organization is different, your culture is different from that organization. Understand that, and so allow yourself and give yourself permission to be different and try different things.
Perfect. Well, there we go. So thank you very much. I appreciate each and every one of you on the call here. I think it was a great conversation, and folks, thanks for joining us today. Have a terrific, it's a Thursday, isn't it? Usually this is Friday. Have a great weekend anyway. All right. And with that, we will talk to everybody soon. Take care.
Thanks for